Spare. Flack. Hello, we continue our analysis of Harry's autobiography. And this section I have titled Flack, and it's not about the flack in terms of receiving criticism, nor is it the flak that's a generic term for ground anti-aircraft fire. A little bit of a historical fact for you. The reason it's described as flak is that it is a contraction of Flugabwehrkanone, the German, which means aircraft defense cannon, or sometimes they will use Fliegerabwehrkanone. So that became Flack. Point of interest for you. No, this is about a person's name, and it's about Caroline Flack. He explained that he met her some months after he split up with Chelsea, and they met up. He didn't really know who she was. She explained she was a TV presenter, and they went to a poker night. And then at one of these poker nights, he was wearing a cowboy hat that belonged to Marco, and he went outside to speak with Billy the Rock, whoever that may have been. I think it's a police officer. Anyway, when he went outside, because he got the cowboy hat on, he explains that two paparazzi who were hiding behind a car didn't recognize him, which enabled him to go over and speak to the police officer and say that basically there were paps down the way. So the police officers went after the paps, screaming at them, and the paps screamed back. And Harry said it was a little victory because they didn't get a picture that night. Unfortunately, his paranoia shows because he states that nobody knew that he was there, and he wondered whether he was being tracked, or were they getting into his phone, or they were getting into Caroline Flack's phone. Following this, though, there was a frenzy, and there was a mob outside Caroline Flack's parents' house, all her friends' houses, and her grandmother's house. And apparently she was described as a bit of rough because she worked in a factory. He said he saw Flack on and off. It's interesting, he doesn't even call her by her first name. But apparently they didn't feel free anymore. So the fact was that the presence of these arseholes, the press, tainted the relationship, and they agreed that it just wasn't worth the grief and the harassment. Now, at the end of the day, it would seem to me, in my mind, that if a relationship was worth having, you'd put up with it irrespective of the interest from the paparazzi. I mean, after all, it's not like he's not used to it. And, of course, Caroline Flack had a degree of fame herself. What's interesting, of course, he makes no reference to what happened to her. And, indeed, basically, he very much treats the relationship as almost a footnote. It barely merits 2 pages. And in the circumstances, it's almost sort of more about, oh, look, here's the paparazzi who've messed up another of my relationships. Again, continuing that narrative of how much he hates the press. And that's all the mention that Caroline Flack gets. He then talks about going to Kensington Palace to have a cocktail, accompanied by JLP, and the cocktail was taking place with General Donat. And he met the General and his wife, and then again, it was explained that he was sorry that the deployment was cut short, and it mentioned that the press ruined everything again. Yes, we get it, Harry. You don't like the press. He then says that he wants to get out there on a full and proper tour again. And the General considered what the options were and suggested, how about being a helicopter pilot? Harry thinks, yeah, well, my dad and William have been helicopter pilots, and the General liked the idea of that because he would be above all of the action, so to speak, and therefore, even if the press found out where he was, the Taliban would have a hard time actually tracking him in the air. So Harry asked, how long would it take me to qualify as a pilot? And he was told 2 years, and he said, well, that's too long. And he said, well, the General says that's what it takes, and it takes a lot of schoolwork. And Harry, again showing his lack of academic aptitude, states that at every turn his life seems to be trying to drag him back into a classroom. And he said he would think about it. He then says that in summer 2008, not thinking about it, he didn't think much about anything apart from the 3 wounded soldiers on the plane back with him. And he was thinking that not enough people were talking about British soldiers coming back from the battlefield, and he wanted a way of doing that. He explained he was sent to America on his first official working trip there. And he said he knew all of the things that he wanted to do, including laying a wreath at the site of the World Trade Center. And he wanted to meet the families of those who died on September the 11th, 2001. And after that, he explained that he went and saw wounded soldiers, visited military grave sites, talking to families swamped in grief. And then he returned back to Britain thinking there's more that needs to be done with regard to helping people who've been affected by war, the soldiers, etc. He also says that he pushed himself too hard and he was burned out and he didn't know it. He said he woke up many times feeling weak with fatigue. But he didn't see how he could slow down because there were so many people that needed help. He then heard about Help for Heroes and he was asked would he wear a wristband, and he said that of course he would do so in order to increase the prominence of it. And he explained that wearing a wristband was very useful because it was a visceral reminder of the power of our platform. Well, we know that Harry's wife isn't behind that because she would have written guttural. The ghostwriter has got that word correct. Harry says that he spent a lot of time at Selly Oak Hospital and Headley Court chatting with soldiers. This again is exhibiting the empathic side of him, that he takes a very keen interest in those who've been affected by combat, and he didn't alert the press, and he only let the palace do so once. He didn't want a reporter anywhere near them. And he said that they were intimate discussions that he had. And he chatted with a soldier about Helmand province, and he explained that he stood by the bedsides of men and women in terrible states and often with their families. And he was shown a diary by one of the family who'd been writing in it, awaiting the recovery of their son. And with permission, Harry wrote in it, so there's something there for him to read when he woke up. And he went to a physical rehab centre. And whilst there, he chatted to a soldier called Ben. And an IED had taken off his left arm and right leg. And he remembers seeing his leg leaving his body. He then receives a prosthetic leg and explained that part of his rehab regime was for him to go up and down a climbing wall. So he did it, shimmied up the wall, and Harry was most impressed to see this, and said he'd never been so proud to be British, to be a soldier, to be his brother in arms. Said that he would buy him a beer, and the soldier said that he intended to do a marathon, and Harry said, well, if you do that, you'll find me waiting at the finish line for you. So again, this demonstrates the empathic traits that Harry has. Interestingly, away from the spotlight, he seems again content that being within the environment of the army and looking to help those people who've been injured and often seriously injured in combat gives him a sense of purpose. And he was involved, of course, in the creation of the Harry's wife, Invictus Games. Help for Heroes, of course, is a notable charity which he had some involvement with, and again gave him a degree of contentment. And it seems to me again that if he were allowed by his handler to remain involved in the charities that meant so much to him, and they could just do it behind the scenes without having to have a Netflix film crew trailing after him or people interviewing him about it, he'd be far more content. You see, again, at each turn in this autobiography, he complains about the press, but then regularly embraces the press for the purposes of making money. And I actually think that if he decided, look, I am going to live my life privately, I'm going to do all of these things that I enjoy, and I'm not going to get myself concerned about the press any longer, and he focused on those things, and was not being told where he should go and what he should do by his wife, he'd be a much, much happier individual. But again, an interesting insight into Harry and demonstrating those empathic traits that he has, which come to the fore when he's involved in dealing with the wounded and the army. Next up, a racial slur. Join me in the next video for more about that.